What is up? What is going on, everybody? Welcome back and welcome in to another edition, the Jay and Sir podcast. The weekly edition is back, and it's been a tough week for Mariners baseball. I feel like we've been saying that a lot recently, but we're going to talk a little bit about the trade deadline coming up here on Tuesday. We'll talk a little bit about some stuff that I brought up yesterday, the brain trust of this team, the front office, coaching staff. And we'll talk a little bit about the upcoming series with the Chicago White Sox and what we can expect from the Mariners here in the next couple days. Before I get started, as always, do me a favor. You guys can hit the like button. It does help out a lot. Comment your thoughts down below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're new. Want to thank everybody for all your support for my video yesterday. Really appreciate it. Despite some of the frustrations with this team, I did chuckle at some of the comments. It made me laugh. So we can always find some enjoyment even in some of the darker times. But welcome in MarinersSUR. Again, if you guys haven't, follow him on Twitter. The link will be in the description down below. One of the best Mariners accounts that you can follow. Great insights to the team. How you doing, my friend?
Doing all right. Rough watching the Mariners for a while now, but otherwise doing well. So thanks for having me on. Looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. Anytime. So we will kick it off here. Trade deadline's on Tuesday, and I think it's sort of a very odd deadline, at least for most Mariner fans, because you look at the standings, Mariners are right there. They're a game back in the West. They're 3.5 back in the wild card. So they're right there. They're actually probably closer than they were last year. Actually, I'm positive they are closer than they were last year coming into the deadline. But the vibes could not really feel worse. So I think, where's your thoughts on this deadline and what the team should do just in a broad sense, I guess?
Yeah, I think for me, if just looking at the standings, a game behind Houston, a couple games out of the wild card, I think you have to buy. A couple of reasons for that. One, you're so close to winning the division, right? One hot streak, you're in a good spot. I think beyond that, there's just not a ton on the team to sell unless you're talking selling one of the young pitchers, right? That you could get an absolute haul for, but I don't think that's smart either because I think everybody wants to and plans to compete next year. And so we're not even in the spot too where some of these teams in the situation might kind of do a buy sell. If you have a bullpen that's really strong and you could go trade your fifth or sixth best reliever, or maybe you're loaded in outfield or infield. We just don't really have depth, whether it's injuries, roster construction. So there's really nowhere I could even say, hey, if somebody wants to give you, a decent prospect for, I don't know, Ryan Stanek or Trent Thornton, not that I think they necessarily would, but those guys have been struggling, but you need them. The alternatives, you call up somebody like Cody Bolton or, Carlos Vargas, Bizardo, and your bullpen gets worse. Right now it's struggling. So I think I don't even think really the buying, selling is an option like it might be for some teams where it wouldn't really hinder you. I think for us, we need kind of all hands on deck that are here. So I think they absolutely have to buy. It's certainly a reliever, with Santos' injury, that's, obviously not good. And even then, it's not like he can go back to back. It doesn't seem. And so I think you got to get another good reliever that can pitch in the back end of the game. And then the lineup, right? Even before the injuries, I thought we needed 3 bats. With them, we probably need 4. I think in an ideal scenario, you maybe add 2 bats that have control past this year. I'd love for all, I think we need to get 4 bats. I would love for all 4 to have control next year, but the supply is limited. So I don't think that's possible. And I don't think that where we're at, Jerry or Justin should shy away from rental players either. I think they kind of owe it to the team, the players, the fan base to give it everything they have to go forth this year. Just kind of one based on how the season started, where we're at. And then 2, where we're at in the standings. So I think, it's a tough task to do. I think they need to get 5 players. But the rental, if you get a rental bat, somebody like, I don't know, Conforto, Yastrzemski, or 2 names that were showed that the Giants were out shopping. Even like a Tommy Pham. There's a few other names that are kind of slipping me, but those guys aren't going to cost a ton. Even like a Josh Bell. It's somebody that somebody wouldn't be excited about, but he was awful last year, went to the Marlins and, helped power him to the playoffs. So he wouldn't cost anything. So I think, maybe 2 players that have control that hurt a little bit prospect wise that you give up. And then maybe 2 rentals that aren't going to cost hardly anything at all. And the hope is you get them in and they provide league average production, if not better, and they solve a couple holes on the team. But yeah, I don't know if they will acquire 4 bats. That's pretty heavy lifting, but in my mind, that's kind of what they need to do to, next Wednesday show up and have a lineup that is formidable. And like we were talking before the show, when we play the Angels, I think after the injuries, they probably have the better lineup. You look at the White Sox right now, I don't think their lineup is much worse, if at all. And so obviously from a talent perspective, we're not in a good spot, due to injuries and performance issues. So I think they almost need to flip over at least 3.5 spots in that lineup, if not 4. So hopefully we'll start seeing some moves soon, because every day that goes by is another, potential and likely loss, and they've got to turn the corner ASAP. So that's kind of where my mind is as a reliever and 4 bats. And yeah, they definitely need to go forward. Just we're right there in the standings, and so I don't think there's any sense in waiting or standing pat. What about you?
Yeah, one thing I keep going back to, I'm with you on selling. I know some people are frustrated. They want to say just sell. There's just not a lot to sell. Like I said, unless you want to sell the starting pitching rotation, which, okay, fine, but then don't talk to me why the team's not competing in 2025. You know what I mean? You can't trade those guys and then go, well, why aren't we winning next year? Well, there you go. Or even the rest of this year. And in terms, like you said, I mean, yeah, you could do a reliever, maybe Josh Rojas, Dylan Moore would get you something, but they're not in that position. And throwing the white flag, even trading those guys, I think sends a bad message to the clubhouse. So I'm with you on the selling. One example that I know you've brought up several times that I keep in my head going back to is I think it was the 2021 Atlanta Braves,
Yep.
who lost Ronald Acuna for the season. And I think they lost somebody else too. I could be wrong. They went out and got Jorge Soler. Was it Ahmed Rosario or Eddie Rosario? I get them
Eddie
mixed
Rosario,
up.
yep.
Guys that weren't exactly, in fact, I think actually Soler was like worth negative WAR that year when he was acquired. And, you brought up some names like Josh Bell. I know these names aren't going to sound exciting to people, but one, there's just not a lot of superstars that you can trade for. Outside of Luis Robert, there's not a lot out there. And sometimes it's just getting some of those pieces that are, one, better than what you have. 2, it can send a message to the clubhouse that we still believe in you guys.
Yep.
And maybe it can just fill enough holes. In a sick way, how bad this offense has been, it shouldn't take much to get them back to average. I mean, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but they're kind of in an odd, good spot because Josh Bell, and I'm not like slamming the table for Josh Bell here, but you put him in a DH, his left-handed power plays well into T-Mobile. Maybe he has a 113 WRC plus the rest of the year, and that's a major upgrade at DH for you, and stuff like that, essentially. So, I know you've mentioned the 21 Braves a few times as kind of, and they were in kind of the same position, I think, as the Mariners, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think they were like 51 and 55 actually, and like 3 or 4 games out. And the other thing I kind of thought on this too is I think in that clubhouse right now, and I could be completely wrong, but I think I think everybody's down in the dumps, and rightfully so. They blew a 10-game lead. They're playing awful. And you go get somebody like Josh Bell, who's been on the last place Marlins all year. And I think he would just be excited to be in a pennant race. And so I think part of that too is just kind of changing maybe some of the mindset in there of like, hey guys, yeah, you guys are struggling, but I was with Miami all year and we didn't have a chance, right? And we got to show up every day and put up, productive at bats. So I think just getting some guys in there that maybe have a different perspective of like, hey, this season's not over. We are right there. Let's just, lace up the cleats and go out there and play baseball like we know we can and see what happens. Because even Divish kind of mentioned that after the game on Wednesday. I think it was like he was on Puck's podcast and, like, hey, how's the clubhouse? He's like, really? I mean, obviously they're down, they're struggling. It's like, but there's so many guys up from Tacoma. They're just happy to not be going to Oklahoma City, like to be up in the major leagues, going to Chicago on a team that has a chance. And he's like, so it's not as down as you would expect. And I think you could even kind of, like I said, enhance that by getting some guys on, into a uniform that has a legitimate chance if you play well to make something happen. And I think hopefully that just like you said, lets the players know, hey, we believe in you. We brought in some names, but also I think just maybe some different perspective can help kind of refresh the guys a little bit as well.
I think that's a great point. And sometimes it's just bigger than the numbers. Like you said with Josh Bell, be like, dude, guys, I was in Miami. We've
Yeah.
lost, we've won 35 games all year. I've mentioned Justin Turner a couple times. Again, for everybody listening, I'm not trying to slam the table saying, oh, you've got to get these guys in here. They might come over and be bad. Like maybe
Yeah.
get Justin Turner in here, and he's a guy. It's like, listen, I've won a World Series. It's been rough in Toronto. Come on, we're right there. Let's get the vibes back going. We're okay. Yeah, everything is right in front of you guys. So it's sometimes deeper than just the numbers. I'm not saying go out and acquire terrible players, but it can just change the vibes a little bit. And you don't need these guys to be perfect. You need them to have a hot streak. Essentially, there's 58 games left, and you just need a 58 game small sample size of good baseball from some of these guys. And maybe just getting some different voices in the clubhouse can sometimes help. I don't think either of us are saying that, Josh Bell, Justin Turner, whoever, going to save the season. But
No.
sometimes guys like that can come over and provide a spark. The team's not 8 games out of contention. And on the other flip side of it too, they're not going to cost you a ton where your farm system that we like and is in good shape is going to be gutted or anything by getting those players. How about some of the more bigger fish though? The Luis Roberts, the Jazz Chisholms. I shouldn't probably compare them. I think Robert's a much better player, but I like Jazz. We can throw Vlad Guerrero Jr. in there. I don't think he's necessarily available, but just for the sake of conversation, those are tough ones for me because they're obviously going to cost you a decent hefty price, but they're also under club control for more than just this year as well. So even if you don't like, Bell and Turner would be kind of, maybe decent options, but I believe they're both free agents after this year. So they're gone. Those are guys, Robert Guerrero, Jazz, that would be with you for this season and beyond. What's your thoughts on maybe some of the bigger names that are just interesting this year? Because rarely does it feel like those big names have the club control on the trade deadline, at the trade deadline.
Yep. And I do think they need to go get one of those, whether it's one of those two you mentioned or somebody even like, Randy Arozarena or Yandy Diaz or Isak Paredes. I think they do need to go get one of those handful of guys that may be available that do have club control. Because if you look at our roster, most of these guys are back next year. And so clearly there are some holes on the roster this year that will likely be there moving forward. And as we know with our ownership, our pitching is going to be getting more expensive. I think Polanco, we don't have to pick up his option. So there's, I don't know, 10 to 15 million that are freed up, Stanek, but there's not a lot. A lot of that will be absorbed by players in arbitration getting raises. So I do think they need to go get, a bat that you can plug in the middle of the order that you do feel, you're not counting on a bounce back like a Josh Bell, and it's kind of maybe wishful thinking. So yeah, I think even a Rosarina is kind of like the lower end of those impact guys you go get. I think the guys I mentioned otherwise are probably a little bit more better and impactful. But yeah, I think they absolutely need to get one, if not two of those. I don't know how feasible it is to get two of them, but they definitely need to go get a controllable bat that, like I said, you can put in the middle of the order and feel pretty good that they're going to, be borderline dynamic, which I think all of those guys I mentioned certainly have the potential to be. Some more likely than others, but kind of have to take what's out there as well.
Yeah, and with like a Luis Robert, even if, and listen, we'll see what if they do acquire him and what the cost is, and that'll kind of impact our thoughts on the trade. But at least they're like, hey, maybe you don't get there this year, but it'd be nice to go in 2025 knowing you got Julio and Luis Robert in your outfield. So not the worst thing to kick off next season with. But I think you made a great point at the beginning of this. You could honestly make a case with Julio out right now and JP out. You could argue they have 8 positions to upgrade.
Yeah.
Truthfully, catcher is probably the only one. And Cal's having not quite a Cal season, but obviously they're not making a move there. But you could even throw first base in there still. I like Tyler Locklear, but if you can get somebody better, great. Polanco's been a little bit better, but not enough for me to go, oh, he's set at second. Shortstop right now, Rojas has been good defensively at third, but his offense, truthfully, since like May has been pretty atrocious.
Right.
Even Luke Raley's had, I think his OPS is under 700 now. And then, obviously Julio's fine, but he's out right now. Julio's not having a Julio season, but you're obviously not going to acquire another center fielder. So, one thing I've thought about here, and I've messaged you on it, we know how Jerry gets. He can get a little crazy, good or bad. Do you see a scenario where they honestly do pull off something where it's like 6 new guys in here? And for anybody listening going, you're crazy, Jerry. I'm not talking like Vlad, Robert, all these guys, but a Justin Turner at first, Josh Bell's your DH. They do go get a big name. They get Luis Robert. And then maybe, I don't know, like Mark Hanna. It's just a name that always pops in my head. Or with the Orioles, Ryan Mountcastle, Cedric Mullins are apparently possibly available. Do you see a scenario where Jerry does pull off something crazy where we're sitting there on Monday with like 6 new guys possibly in this lineup?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I think one, like you said, Jerry likes to trade, and two, it is something where you could, when you look at the lineup, you could say, hey, we need to do that. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they go get a legit handful of players. And if they do that, maybe one of them will be big, like you alluded to, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I will say the longer they go without making that initial move or two, I think the less likely it is, just because time's not on your side. So I think in order to do that, they got to make a move here probably the next 24 to 48 hours. I could be wrong on that, but I just think it'd be hard to do that on the last day of the deadline. There's just too much going on to pull that off. So yeah, they got to get moving if that is the direction they want to go, I would say.
Yeah, it seems, and obviously I'm being a bit over the top with it. And if they're going to do something like that, they would have probably needed to make at least 1 or 2 trades by now. Let's talk about that a little bit. We're sitting here 3 days, 4 days, whatever day it is, Thursday, for 5 days before the deadline right now. And the Mariners have not made a move. And one thing I've said on my channel, I think you probably agree with this, it's hard. The hardest moves to judge are the ones that aren't made. Because we just, we can be critical of Jerry, and I'm frustrated they haven't done something. But a lot of teams haven't made movements. There's just AJ Puck just got traded to Arizona. Really, in some regards, kind of the first big name, and it's AJ Puck, who's actually had a really nice season. Where do you think it is? Because we can be frustrated they haven't made a move, but is it possible it's just it's not there? I know we've talked about this a lot, but I do see a lot of people frustrated without the moves, and I agree with it. But it's also just possible that they're just not coming to an agreement, or there's just not enough teams willing to really sell right now.
Yeah, I do think that's quite possible. That's what's going on, is teams just aren't, for whatever reason, willing to make a move. I think that, 2 years ago, we got Carlos Santana pretty early. So I do wonder if, I'll go back to him, like Josh Bell. If they wanted him, I do wonder if they could have got somebody like him sooner. But like the bigger pieces of Rosarina, Luis Robert, those don't surprise me. I feel like those could be kind of the last day of the deadline when they do get moved. So yeah, I do think that's probably part of the issue. And the majority of it is that, teams just aren't ready to move. And hopefully this weekend we start seeing it to shake loose. But yeah, I think that's a good point.
And I do think there is some stubbornness with the front office at times. Cause I don't even know if he's still pitching well or if he's even healthy. I mentioned back in May, like you could probably call Oakland and get Austin Adams right now if you wanted him. You bring up a great example. There's no way you couldn't have gotten Josh Bell a month ago if you wanted him. But I do think there's probably a little bit of like, well, Josh Bell's really not that much better than Mitch Garver, so we're not going to make that move. We're going to get Santos back. I'm not going to give away prospects for Austin Adams. And again, I'm just using Adams' name as an example. I don't even know if he's still pitching or not, to be perfectly honest. But is it stubbornness? Is it smart? I really don't know. But yeah, to your point, like there's no way they couldn't have acquired a Josh Bell if they wanted to by now. You could probably send Miami your 40th prospect and gotten him. So it's tough. It's tough to judge some of the moves, and the non-moves are the toughest to judge because we just don't know.
Yep. 100%.
We'll change subjects a little bit here. We're going to move on from the trade deadline. Obviously, if there's any news, in the next few days, I'll be on. I'll break it down for you guys, and maybe I'll have MarinersSUR on with me if he's able to, and we'll discuss it. But do want to get your take as the Mariners continue to slide here, 53 and 51. Obviously, still in it, but definitely a lot of frustrations. Where are you at on the front office and coaching staff overall right now?
Yeah, definitely frustrated. So I'll try to unpack this a little bit, just kind of my thoughts. So, honestly, I've been a pretty big Jerry defender in the past. And this is just kind of looking at post rebuild to now. I think that, 3 years in a row, they won 88 plus games, which I think is very, very good. Right. I think in 21, I believe they won 90 games, just missed the playoffs. 22, they won 90 or 88, made the playoffs. 23, 88, just missed it. So I think that's solid. And part of the reason I feel like I've been a defender is there's a couple things that I think the front office does extremely well. One is obviously pitching development. And I think that's very, very important. Two, I think they're maybe one of the better drafting organizations, and that's evidenced just by how quickly they built the farm system back up after trading a lot of pieces. So I think those two are huge. A lot of GMs and organizations don't do it nearly as well as Jerry and Justin do. So I think that's huge that they can do that. But on the flip side, and I'll go back to, I guess, 22. After 21, we just missed the playoffs. 22, they bring in Winker, Frazier, Suarez, and the Carlos Santana middle of the year. Winker struggled. He still is a league over a league average bat, a little bit above it, but nowhere near what we expected. Adam Frazier was a positive WAR player, but had like an 80 WRC plus. I think in that instance, I was kind of willing to chalk it up to, hey, it was good process, but the guys they brought in just didn't get it done. And then Suarez was phenomenal that year. So they and Santana was good when they brought him in. So they kind of were like 50-50. But all four players were at least playable, and they made the playoffs. I think they could have made it a lot further if Winker was what we expected and Frazier as well. And then you go to the next year, they bring in Teoscar, Colton Wong, AJ Pollock. Teo was decent, but nowhere where they expected. And then Pollock and Wong were completely unplayable. So now that's 2 years in a row of kind of these additions not panning out and all. And then, 23, I think if they would have been playable like Winker and Frazier were, so if Wong and Pollock would have been playable like Jesse Winker and Adam Frazier were, I think we probably make the playoffs. Probably not good enough to get over. We needed, Teo to do what we expected. So kind of, chalking it up to a little bit of just good process, bad luck. And then we go into this year, they bring in Mitch Garver, Jorge Polanco, Mitch Haniger, and I may be forgetting somebody, but none of them have been playable. And once again, if they were even just playable, we probably have a nice size lead. And if they played like we expected, we would be, I think, touted as a World Series contender. So now that's 3 straight years where they have, whiffed on the majority of these additions, which is a concern to me. I think I've overlooked a lot of that just because they do the pitching and drafting so well. But it's becoming a huge concern now. Then even when you go back to when Jerry got here, they had a pretty good core and just missed the playoffs a lot. But the guys they brought in, like Adam Lind and others, didn't really pan out, which is unfortunate. So he's kind of had this track record of that first time going for it, not really getting him over the hump, and we're running into it again. How much of that do you pin on Jerry versus, when he first came in, they had this core, but really no budget to work with. So they had to go get these cheap players. And then we're running into it again. So is it, ownership not giving them the budget? I think that's part of it. But at the same time, I think they brought in players, especially like this year, and Teo and Winker, that the process looked fine, but why are all these guys falling short? So I think that falls on the front office. The fact that it's happened, 3+ years now, you can't just chalk it all up to bad luck. So it's tough. I think they don't, and I think he's got one chance to kind of fix it, and it's at this deadline, right? If he goes and brings in hitters that produce, we'll probably win the division and save his job. If not, I think you have to make a change, which it makes me a little bit scared, to be honest, because you are, firing a GM that's been one of the better pitching development front offices out there, one of the better drafting front offices out there. What happens if you bring in guys that don't do that well and we still run into the same ownership constraints? It won't, we're going to be even in worse shape. And so that's kind of where my mind goes. And I had another thought that slipped me on that. It'll come back to me. What's your thoughts while I try to remember what I was going to say?
You're good. Yeah, no, I once again, I think I agree pretty much everything you said there. And I will add too, like, there is a part of it's like, do I trust John Stanton to find a better GM? No. And the ownership group in China, I know it's not just John, but the ownership group, no, that's definitely a big role in it. I'm with you. I think overall, this front office has done more good than bad. I think if this job opened up tomorrow, I think it's an extremely, taking ownership out of the equation a little bit, I think it's an extremely attractive job. It's a great city. It's a fan base that is actually willing to be patient. I think some of the patience is running thin, but it's not a fan base it's a fan base that understands like, I'll use a Seahawks analogy. I don't think I'm expecting Mike McDonald to win the Super Bowl year one. We know it takes time. You've got a great core in place. You've got the best pitching staff, I think, top to bottom in baseball. I think you even have some decent offensive core pieces as well to build around. For me, it's just, and I'm with you. I think there's been a lot of good process. I've liked most of the moves they made. I liked this offseason. I thought Jorge Polanco, Mitch Garver were great additions. I thought getting Mitch Garver in there every day at DH was going to be huge because it was kind of a revolving door last year, really until you got Mike Ford in the mix. I was like, perfect. You're going to be able to plant Garver in there from day one. He's going to give you solid production. Jorge Polanco is going to fix our second base problem. Yep. And somehow has been better than Colton Wong, but worse than Adam Frazier hitting.
Right.
And I'm just kind of at the point where, yeah, I've liked the process, but the results aren't showing. And after they lost to Houston, and I know people are tired, I've said this 5 times in the last 5 videos. After they lost game 3 to Houston, I did my post game and I said, like, listen, this season was a lot of fun. Now it's time. Now you got to take the next step. Again, for any Seahawks people, very similar to like 2012 when they lost to Atlanta in the playoffs. That was a fun season. I thought that was a Super Bowl team. That loss was heartbreaking, but I knew that team could take the next step, and they did. They won the Super Bowl in the next year. The Mariners haven't done it. They've been competitive. They've been there, but they haven't gotten over the hump yet. Now, I do think ownership has played a big role in that. Yeah. Unfortunately, John Stanton's not going to fire himself in this ownership group. Not much we can do there. So I just don't know if this is the group to get them over the top. And kind of to your point, I think if they don't make the playoffs here in the final 58, I don't have any ill will towards the front office necessarily. I think they've overall put this team in a decent spot. The farm system's in great shape, but I think you've got to try and look if there's someone out there. I know you've mentioned like the Twins organization. Maybe you look at Baltimore, who's got kind of similar ownership issues, or they did. I think they have a new owner now, and go, okay, these are teams that have, how do we get this team over the top now? That would kind of be my question if I was the owner of this team. Like, I'd bring in the GMs and go, listen, I think Jerry Justin did some good things here, and I want that to continue, but we need this team to be a legit World Series contender. Now, this is assuming they don't go on some run here in the final 58.
Right.
They might. Like we say it all the time, we should call this podcast Baseball is Weird, because it is. And maybe they do go on a run to win the World Series. You never know. But just looking where it's at now, it's just hard for me to, looking back to what I said 2 years ago, to sit here and go, yeah, another year. I think I'd have to kind of be out on them, to be honest.
Yeah, and I remember what I was going to say. Kind of 2 thoughts that running through me. So the first, what I was going to say is, from the ownership perspective, and this is kind of an offensive Jerry a little bit, is it's not only just the limited payroll they're giving them, but if you look at some of the reporting and reading between the lines, Stanton has promised them one thing from a payroll, and this last offseason was a perfect example. And then all of a sudden it comes to the offseason and he completely changes what's going to be available to them. And with baseball, you're planning years in advance. And I think that's hard to operate as a general manager when you keep getting the rug pulled out from under you. And so this last offseason that happened, all of a sudden they had to scramble and, trade Kelnick and Suarez just to leash or unload some salary to try and put together a complete roster. And he's done that 2 or 3 off seasons in a row. And it's, if you're the Rays, for example, you're not going to have budget. So you have to operate in one manner. And it's, guys get close to free agency. We got to cash them in for prospects that are close. Brewers are kind of in the similar way, right? They did it with Josh Hader. So I think they probably would have did some moves differently to set themselves up better for future years if they knew the payroll was going to be what it was going to be. But they were told one thing and it ended up being a different thing. And that's just hard to operate year over year with that. It doesn't necessarily excuse them because they've moved payroll around. They had some payroll available this year and the guys they brought in didn't hit like they expect. And you could say that same thing for the last 2 years. So that's on the front office, but I think it really has kind of handcuffed them at times. And then the second part on Jerry is, you read things that the clubhouse doesn't like him, right? For whatever reason, whether it's communication, maybe he's made some moves that he had to because of Stanton. But I think if the season keeps going off the rails, I think things will get, very, very kind of hostile in that clubhouse, even just internally and towards Jerry. And I think at that point, that's another reason you need to make a move, is just to start fresh and new. I think just to give the players a new kind of voice in the front office and hopefully try to reinstill some confidence. I don't think it's completely shot at this point, but if it keeps trending the way it's going, I just don't know how that even works next year, honestly, just based off of some of the contention before. And I think that would only be the dial would only be cranked up another 10 if it keeps going off the rails. And I think the players are a ton to blame this year too, because if they played to the back of the baseball cards, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But there is just some ill will there that I think would be smart to move on for. So hopefully they go on a run this year. Hopefully he can acquire some pieces at the deadline that assist in that. And this is all kind of a conversation that, we can throw in the trash bin. But I think if it does keep trending how it's going, yeah, something has to be done.
Yeah, and that's just I thought you made three really good points. The first one about the ownership. I think it's the biggest issue is the ownership here. When it comes down to it, it wouldn't shock me if in 3 years, let's say Jerry's gone this offseason, we look back and go, man, I miss Jerry. I could see, it could get really bad really quickly too. We might look back, go, man, Jerry kept this team afloat for us, so that's a huge issue. And that's what makes this conversation so difficult is it's just not clear cut on what is the number one core issue, at least in my opinion. Maybe some people have a better idea of it and they are set on this is the core problem. But for me, it's very gray. I think there's a lot of gray in this. It's not a black and white thing. You made a great point too about the clubhouse, not really liking Jerry. And the clubhouses are tough to manage. I remember even go back to 2010. I don't know if you were following the Mariners back then when Griffey was back for his second tour duty, his second year second tour duty. And he was hitting like 180 with no power, and he retired, and he was causing issues in the clubhouse with Wakamatsu at the time. And players were kind of like, oh man, we love Griff. Like, he's just battling through it and everything. It's okay. Players get attached to their guys.
Right.
They get attached to their teammates. It's hard to manage because you want them to be happy, but you always kind of go like, guys, this guy kind of stinks. We need to move on. We can't keep trotting it out there. So it's such a tough dynamic there with the clubhouse and then trying to keep that together, but also balance a roster as well. Like I said, hopefully they go on a run here and it's just not something we have to discuss because, I would love nothing more than just have this team be a perennial playoff team. And we're set with what we have. And it just really becomes a model organization. But unfortunately, it just right now for me, if you told me season ends tomorrow, I think you have to make a move. I think there's just too much, like you said, with the clubhouse, too much frustration, players versus front office. The team has not gotten over the hump. Another great point you made too, the players cannot be off the hook here. And I think sometimes some of the fan base does let them off the hook a little bit. Mm-hmm. They've got to be better. Now, again, Jerry and Justin, and we'll talk about Scott here in a second as well, ultimately take the fall. I've said it, like the results aren't good. You got to go. But the players own some of this too. They have not produced to the back of their baseball cards. And I know there's frustration with the coaching. We're going to talk about that. But I highly doubt that Jorge Polanco came in here and they told him to change anything. I guarantee they probably just like, dude, do what you've done. Whatever you've been doing, just keep doing it. So I guess I will roll that into Scott Servais. I actually thought there was maybe a chance today we would see something there. What's your thoughts on Scott?
Yeah, and I made a post about this the other day. And if I had to rank, like accountability for this or blame, I think one would be John Stanton, the ownership group. 2A, 2B, however you want to put it, is front office and the players. And then Scott Servais is like last on the rung in terms of blame. But at the same time, like the easiest, like ownership's not going to fire themselves. Not going to fire Jerry midseason. You can only change over players so much. So the easiest thing to do is to replace a manager. I think Scott's had some like head scratching decisions this year in games, but every time I say that, the next game, he'll kind of do what I thought he should have did. And it doesn't work out either. So I think part of it is just players aren't performing. The team's just having bad innings and the worst time. Like I think of the Angels, the last 4 games or 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 6, whatever it may be, they've scored all their runs they scored in a game in just 1 inning. So there's been kind of a blow up inning, whether it's errors or a reliever comes in and lets up a few runs. And it's been different relievers that have done it too. So in a way, it's like, what's he supposed to do? But at the same time, if the clubhouse is starting to get frustrated and friction within it, that is kind of the one thing that falls on Scott. And sometimes a new voice can just give players like a fresh start almost. So I wouldn't have been opposed if they made a move, but I also think he's probably the last one to blame for where we're at. But once again, if it trends the way it's going, I'm sure even if Jerry were to stay, I think he would probably have to bring in a new manager. And obviously they bring in a new GM, he'll bring in his own guy. So I don't think they're going to make a move within season. I'd be very surprised. I think that would have came yesterday if it did. But yeah, I don't think he's had his best year, but also I think he's had really good bullpens in the past. It can make a manager look good, and that's not the case this year. But I do think he has made some moves that, haven't. For me, usually I can kind of follow what he's doing, but there's been times this year where I'm scratching my head before the wheels come off. So yeah, I don't place a ton of blame on him, but I also don't think he's done a great job this year either.
Yeah, I mean, I could just say ditto and we could end the video right there because, again, I mean, kind of where I'm at. I kind of talked about it yesterday and I said, like, listen, I'm kind of over it too with Scott. I think it just might be time. He's been here a while. The voice may just be getting stale.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to keep bringing it back to football, and I'm not trying to compare Scott's accomplishments to what Pete Carroll did. Pete brought home a Lombardi trophy here, but eventually the voice has just been here for a while. You need new blood. And I'm with you. Like, listen, in the pecking order of it, it starts at the top. It's ownership. Like, if this team fails to make the playoffs, that should be the first. That's the first where the blame should go. But like you said, John Stanton's not going to fire John Stanton. Then I go to Jerry and Justin next. Like, what did you guys put on the field? You're responsible for this roster. That's where the Seahawks were always a little different because Pete was VP, so it was a little tougher to balance the blame there. But that would be my next thing is look at them. Then it's Scott. But you hit the nail on the head 100%, right? Like, Jerry and Justin aren't going to be fired 3 days before the trade deadline. You can't get 26 new players. I probably wouldn't say no outside the starting pitching staff if they did. So it's the manager. And I'm with you too. There has been some more head scratching stuff this year. Losing a 10-game lead in 22 games. I mean, I wouldn't predict the White Sox. If you gave them a 10-game lead tomorrow, they should be able to hold it longer than 22 games, essentially. Now, does a lot of that fall on the players? 100%. But I just look at that and I go, I don't think you can keep that voice in the clubhouse, essentially.
Right.
So I'm not going to lose sleep. Like I said yesterday, if they fired Scott today or didn't, I'm not going to lose sleep over that. I think there's a lot of bigger issues. I think they need better talent in here, and maybe a front office change and an ownership change would be great, but that's not going to happen. I don't think this is all on Scott 100%. It's not all on anybody, but I am at the point where it's just, I think the voice is getting stale. He had the rant on Monday, didn't work. Probably not again, probably not his fault, but they didn't respond to him yelling. I don't know some of the things, Jake from Raise and Try made a great point. Like, we don't know everything that goes on. It's hard to break that down. We don't know what they're saying in the clubhouse. They may be 100% bought into Scott, and it's not translating on the field, but it's just, and even yesterday, like talking about the head scratching moves, like why Trent Thornton and not Munoz?
Right.
That spot in the 8th inning. That's a huge game. You're not gun shy from using Munoz for 4-out saves. But then again, like kind of your point, you go the other way. It's also not Scott's fault. Gregory Santos got hurt in that situation either.
Right.
So there's so many little variables that go into it. And the bottom line for anybody listening that doesn't like Scott and is frustrated, if they don't make the playoffs, he's probably gone anyways, whether it's Jerry that stays and they have to make a managerial change, or to what you said, like if Jerry's gone, a new GM is going to bring in his guy. So to me, it's also just kind of like, I don't want to say it doesn't matter. I don't know the word I'm looking for, but the change will happen probably regardless if they don't make the playoffs for sure. I mean, we can just Jerry, Justin, I think there's a debate. If they don't make the playoffs, I don't see any way that Scott is back. I think it would be almost impossible to justify that.
Right. Yeah. And like Scott, a couple things that like stood out to me this year is, like you said, can't control Santos getting hurt. And then even like in the Angels series, Stanek got hurt, right? So that's twice against the Angels. Now he's lost a reliever in the 8th inning to an injury. But in that same Angels series in Anaheim, he put Austin Both in for 3 days in a row. He's never done that before. Like Saucedo has like a 2.03 ERA. I know that it's been, they put him in a spot to succeed against lefties, but it's like, why not go to him instead of Voth for 3 days in a row? And then, they put Stanek, I think maybe the Astros game, he had 3 bad outings in a row and he was back out there, lets out, or maybe it's another game he blew it in the 8th. I'm like, why not go to somebody else in the 8th? Like Stanek's had 3 bad, but he went back to him. And then on the hitting side, I feel like a lot of these guys have been struggling all year, and they just kept running the same players out game after game. And I think to me, that's maybe where a manager can step in and say, hey, this guy needs a breather. He's really wearing it. He's not going well. But to me, they just kept running out the same night after night. And I think that's where, as a manager, you could say, hey, we need to give him 2 days off, let him breathe, go work in the cages a little bit. They just haven't done that. And so I think that's maybe where he's came short a little bit, is maybe reading the room. And it probably wouldn't have mattered. But I think between just like running the same position players out and some of the bullpen moves when guys are struggling, because outside of Munoz, none of these guys have had like outstanding years to the point where if they have 3 bad outings in a row, you just keep running them out there. They've all ran into pockets where they've struggled. So if you see one of those pockets, probably a time to put them in lower leverage and give somebody else a try. And I don't think they've done a great job at that either. And a lot of that's, discussed before the game with the analysts or front office. So maybe he doesn't even have a choice. I don't know. But yeah, that's just, I think some of it where I do put some of the blame on Scott is in those areas.
Yeah, and there's so many double-edged swords to it, because I think we were talking, it was Monday when Stanek came in the 8th with the Bryce Miller start and gave up the lead. And then I think we were kind of talking like, why not use Trent Thornton there? He's been better recently. Well, then Trent Thornton comes in the 9th and gives up 2 runs. So it's kind of like, for that moments I have sympathy for Scott. Like, it's not easy. Right. But I think one of the places you just hit the nail on the head was just not recognizing things early. How long it took them to put Victor Robles in the lineup every day. Now, I get it. Victor Robles has not been a good hitter in his career. And that's probably, if we had a candid conversation with Jerry, Justin, and Scott, like off the record, they'd probably go, guys, Victor Robles has stunk. We just didn't think he would, be a good hitter. But sometimes you just, I forgot if it was you that said it or if it was Jake or the Collins brothers had on, but you just got to ride the wave sometimes. And if Victor Robles is swinging the bat, just let him have the at-bats. And then if he cools off, then he can make the move. But there's been so much of like, well, the numbers say this. And I'm an analytics guy too, so I'm not dismissing that. I think I always use the example last year. They stuck with Matt Brash. His ERA was in the 6s for the first 2 months. The underlying numbers told you this is a lights-out reliever. Smart move. They stuck with him. It paid off. It can pay off with that, but there are times when you just got to go, this guy's swinging the bat well right now. Don't really care what his name is. He's playing. And I think sometimes they are very slow on that to a detriment. I mean, I get it. I don't think it's, again, a black and white situation. But, yeah, I'm with you. And it just, with the way it's been going, losing the 10-game lead, I think it's time. I'm kind of at that point. It's not an ill will thing either. I'm not going to celebrate it if Scott's fired. I don't think he's necessarily, I think he's a good guy. I think he's done some good things here. I think I'm just at the point. I think it's time for a different voice. And you mentioned on Twitter yesterday, like, Christopher Negron, a little bit younger, maybe a little more energy, maybe it gets the guys going a little bit, something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's worth the shot.
Especially now. Exactly. So, I think that's about all we've got. Mariners do have a 3-game set coming up starting tomorrow with the Chicago White Sox. We've talked about it a little bit. Certainly a series, again, the Mariners probably should win. But again, dealing with injuries, Julio will be out, JP's out, Cal might be a little banged up, and you're going to be facing Drew Thorpe, Eric Fetty, and Garrett Crochet. Not an easy task in this series.
No, yeah, I don't know how we faced them both times and got those 3 pitchers. Thorpe's been, I think, low 3 ERAs since he's been called up, like just 1 bad outing. Fetty, sub 3 ERA, been great all year, and Crochet is one of the best pitchers in baseball. They have seemed to pull back on his innings a little bit. But Fetty's been a workhorse. Thorpe's been good. Obviously we got after their bullpen last time. They do have some good arms in there. And then, like we were saying before the show, with the injuries, I don't know if our lineup is much better than theirs right now. They have Luis Robert. We don't. Guys like Gavin Sheets, Andrew Vaughn, Tommy Pham, those guys are all, decent. And so that's kind of where I think this series could be more tough than you realize against a 27-77 team, is just with the injuries and how we're playing. I don't know how much better we are than them. And then with getting their 3 best pitchers who have been very, very good, I think it's fair that our lineup could struggle. And if, Robert hits a 2 or 3 home run in one of those games, or Sheets does, or Vaughn, are we going to be able to score that many? I don't know, so it's one I hope we can get 2 out of 3. The Astros play the Dodgers. I don't know who the Rangers play, but they're right in the mix now too. Yeah. But yeah, we need a series win in the worst way, because after that we play the Red Sox and Phillies. And if you go drop a series, against the White Sox. It's just things just keep snowballing. So they got to find a way, even though we face 3 good pitchers. But I think it can be tough. 3 close games, it would not surprise me at all.
Yeah, it's not going to be a cakewalk. I think we joked about it yesterday, talking to each other. Like, the good news is with how bad the offense has been, every pitcher's kind of the same. You're facing a Cy Young Award winner, it feels like every night. I got to say, kind of tongue in cheek a little bit, but, facing the Angels and now the White Sox with these 3 starters, the Angels with, Soriano and Tyler Anderson, and their back end of their bullpen's pretty good. Where are these teams losing all these games? Because sometimes we face these teams. And even the Angels, like, I know they're not very good, but I look at them like, and maybe it's just the Mariners playing down a little bit too, but I'm like, I don't know, they look okay. Like, they're not that awful. So, just kind of funny. The White Sox, they're 27-77. They've won 27 games. I'm looking at their rotation. Then I look at their lineup and, like you said, Andrew Vaughn's decent hitter. DeYoung's been okay. Jimenez is back. Robert's a good hitter. And I'm like, why are they? I know their bullpen's been rough, but Kopech's got some good stuff. And it's just kind of funny because I look at these teams and go, why are they so bad? And I know the White Sox offense has been awful, but it's just been kind of funny. I feel like we talk about these series and all these videos and all these bad teams. And I'm kind of like, man, they look better than I thought they did.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, it could be the Mariners. Even like the Angels, they made a lot of tremendous defensive plays in this series in Seattle. Like the Locklear near double with the bases loaded, right? I think Rengifo gets down and makes a diving grab double play. And then Adele steals an RBI double from Raleigh down in the right field corner. And it's just, I think the Angels in particular, well, I know the White Sox are bad, but with the pitching they have, you think they would win a few more games than they have. So I think they've lost 11 in a row. So hopefully we can make it 14. I mean, a sweep would be huge. That would, I think, turn things around, but I have zero hope that happens the way we're going. And with the injuries, like we said, a lineup that was just maybe struggling and you had hope could turn it around is now just, I think flat out really bad on paper. So I think sweeping anybody is difficult right now for sure. But so I'll take a series win. I would be very happy with that.
Yeah. And right now, until the Mariners really get going, it's hard to predict it. If they sweep, it'd be great. The vibes would feel at least back for a little bit. But until they do it, it's just, I can't sit here and go, I think they should win the series. I think they're better than the White Sox, clearly. But to your point, until it happens, it's just so tough to really, be optimistic until they actually start doing it. I guess the last thing I'll leave with, the best I can give for Cope, for fans, they're still right there in the standings. The Astros are playing the Dodgers. I mean, if you take 2 out of 3 from the White Sox, Dodgers sweep, you're in first place. Not the craziest thing ever that either of those results would happen. As frustrating as those 6 games against the Angels were, I mean, a couple, like you said, and I'm not excusing the Mariners, they played awful, but, Adele doesn't make the catch. Rengifo, that ball goes off his glove or something. You probably win 2 or 3 of those games. And that's still not great going 2-4 over a stretch against the Angels, but you'd be a game up in the division if you did it. So, maybe just a couple more balls fall in for the team. Maybe they just get a couple breaks. I don't care right now. Luck your way into wins. Get hit by 60 pitches. I do not care. Find a way to get runs, and let's see if we can get this thing turned around a little bit.
Yep. Yeah. Let's look. Astros played Dodgers, and then they got the Pirates after. It looks like they faced Paul Skeens in game 1. So they got a very, very tough next 4 games. So if we can turn it around this weekend, like I said, I think we should be in first. And it looks like the Rangers play the Blue Jays and the Cardinals, and then the Red Sox after. So, I mean, Blue Jays aren't good, but they have talent. It looks like they face Yusei, Kevin Gausman, and Barrios this weekend. So they'll face some good arms. And then the Cardinals have been a lot better as well. So hopefully the Rangers can slow down a little bit too and coincide with us playing good baseball this weekend. I mean, we need it. We're running out of time.
Yep. And one thing you said too, sometimes when you're struggling, just going on the road can help.
Yep.
It gets you away from the boos. Not that the boos aren't deserved, but it gets you away from it. You're going to a hitter's park. Maybe the offense can get a little jolt playing in Chicago. That might help a little bit. In Fenway, another pretty friendly hitter's park, especially for righties. So, again, guys, anybody listening, I'm looking for silver linings. It's not just in my prediction, but little things like that can sometimes help. We even saw on the last road trip, they go to San Diego. sweep the Padres. Still trying to figure out how that happened now, what we've seen the last couple of weeks.
Right.
But again, like I said, kind of our motto, baseball's weird.
Yep, for sure.
Awesome. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching, listening. Hopefully, well, actually, this will be up tonight, so you guys can all listen to this tonight before the White Sox series. Appreciate you joining me as always, my friend. Thank you again for coming on. I always appreciate your insight and the therapy sessions that we're able to do together to kind of get through a bit of a rough Mariner stretch right now.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I feel better already. Not about the team, but just talking about some of the struggles feels good.
And that's anybody listening, we're here for you guys. So, vent away in the comments, but we'll all get through this together. We'll be okay. We've been through this before, nothing new that we can't handle. Have a great night, everybody. Take care, and I'll see you all tomorrow night for the post-game recap. Peace.